As the dialogue evolves, you see that it's actually her who is not seducing him, but trying to get him to confess, also using alcohol. And he's the weak guy there, and he's the guy who's so nervous, and he's because he's hiding this hideous secret. And it's the alcohol who finally gets him almost confessing. So it's not a seduction scene, it's a confession scene. And it's a moment of female empowerment that you were not definitely not very common during the 1950s.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. My name is James, joined as ever by my good friend Steve, and this is Every Best Picture, where we are going through every winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture, from Wings right up to the present day. This year, it's 1954's On the Waterfront. And this episode, we have a guest. It's becoming a bit of a trend now. I am delighted to welcome my dear friend, Mike Hostench. Hello, Michael. Hey.
Hello.
Look at that with the screen behind and everything.
Oh man, I tell you, he's done the homework. He's done the.
So, Mike, Steve, Mike.
Pleasure.
How you doing?
Very well.
So proud. It's an honor to be here. Really, it is.
Not at all. No, it's our pleasure to have you on here. So before we get into On the Waterfront, why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about who you are and why you're talking movies with us today?
Well, I've been involved in the film business for mostly all my life. I spent 20 years being the co-director of Sitges Film Festival, which is the largest genre film festival in the world. And it's true that it's dedicated mostly to horror, science fiction, and fantasy, but noir, I have to admit that also noir is my other passion if we are talking film. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I think that On the Waterfront could be typecast as noir, but this is something that we can talk about later. Yeah, so I've been mostly related with genre during my career, and lately I've been more into the production field, in the film and television production. But yeah, I've been eating, drinking, smoking, and breathing movies all my life. Yeah,
that's right. I have been very honored to have shared some of those experiences with you. Mike and I have known each other for about 12 years, I think, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
We met just on the festival circuit and have spent many nights debating the strengths and weaknesses of world cinema over soju and Korean barbecue and what have you. It's been a great backdrop to our friendrip.
That sounds great.
And Catalan wine sometimes also, yeah. not only in Asia. You've been also in Sitges. Sorry, but I had to say this.
No, it's true. That's all thanks to you. So yeah, thank you for that.
Now, I gotta say, like when I heard you're in Madrid, I'm a veteran of the Camino de Santiago. I've walked it twice, and so I've been out there and enjoyed the wine, and it's a wonderful area.
It is. Actually, I lived in Madrid since the last couple of years only. I'm from Sitges, and I'm from Barcelona, but I lived mostly in Sitges the last decade. But I love Madrid, and it's a place my mom lived for 21 years here, so I'm familiar. But I'm only been in Madrid for the last couple of years as a Madrileño. So, but yeah, the Camino de Santiago. Good point there. Yeah.
I mean, what's that? Just to completely go off topic for no reason whatsoever, what would you say are the main differences in lifestyle between living in Madrid and living in Barcelona?
Well, sorry for being so typical. I mean, everybody says the same, and Madrid doesn't have the sea. And living in Sitges, as you can imagine, is something that you see every day. So this is one of the things that I could miss. And again, sorry for being so typical, saying something like this, but it's true. And there is not much difference. People don't speak Catalan. I think this is the other thing that definitely you notice when you're in Madrid. But besides that, I mean, I love it, and it's a place that is also very much a film place. I mean, there is a huge community of film lovers here in Madrid, like it is in Barcelona or in Sitges. And so there is no difference here. You were talking about the difference. You were asking me about the differences, but there is a huge film lover community here also. So I don't miss this in Madrid.
So when I invited you to join us on the show, I basically gave you the choice, free reign. Just pick any movie on the list, and we'll talk about it. And you jumped straight in and said, "I know exactly what I'm going to talk about, On the Waterfront." Why? Why was that your pick?
There is many reasons. The first one is something that hits close to home, and is that I remember when I watched it for the first time on TV with my dad, rest in peace. And it was dubbed in Spanish, but I have to say that the Spanish dubbing when I was a kid was very good, and I watched it later on in a cinematheque in English language. But at first I saw it in Spanish. And by the way, the Spanish title is La Ley del Silencio, which means the law of silence, which is an excellent title also.
Oh, wow.
It's a great, it's a great adaptation of a title that has nothing to do with it, but originally. But it also has to do a lot with the movie, La Ley del Silencio, the law of silence. So I remember watching it with my dad, and I immediately detected that normally 50s movies were more focused on entertaining, on being recreational. But in this case, you just have to watch the first scene at the bar. And I remember my dad and I immediately detected, man, this is adult stuff, very much. So okay, first is more my romanticized vision of the movie, but also with the years and watching it many times after that, I realized also that there is a film that is very realistic for a decade that was not exactly focused on realism, that was the Hollywood 50s. And also, but at the same time, is realistic, and at the same time, is very symbolic and has social criticism. And again, things that are not very much common in the Hollywood of the 50s. And this makes it a very unique movie.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think beyond the sort of the social symbolism of it, there's obviously a big sort of Christian element to it, Catholicism in there, you know, about well, you know, he becomes a kind of Christ-like figure, doesn't he? You know, making sort of these sacrifices on behalf of the people, while Karl Malden's priest character is you know, preaching from various temporary pulpits around the city about what have you, which I'm sure Steve is going to jump in on.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. But even before you mentioned that, Mike, I just wanted to say, as soon as you mentioned watching it when you're a young man with your father, and you said rest in peace, I have the same story. I watched this for the first time with my father, who sadly passed away 3 years ago. And while I was rewatching it for this recording, I had that going through my head, because my dad used it also, not as a major moral lesson for me. I mean, he wasn't sitting there saying, oh, you know, understand this part of this part, but he really accentuated what it meant to make right choices, that sometimes making the right choice is not the easy way. And, you know, he kind of, and because, as James alluded, I do come from a religious background. It was nice as a young person to see a priest in a very positive role, which often in film, it's a little hit or miss on how the priesthood and Christian figures can be portrayed.
Yeah, for sure.
I also come from a Catholic background, and also helps you to understand some things in the movie. And at the same time, I have to add to the things that I said before. Also, the noir element was important. I'm not sure if I was already using the term noir when I saw the movie for the first time, but or cine negro, which is the Spanish expression for that, or cinema negra in Catalan. But I remember that my father loved gangster movies. So it's obviously, as Eddie Muller would put it, it's not exactly the same thing, a gangster movie, than a noir film, but also the gangster and noir element. I really enjoyed it, even the first time I watched the movie. Sorry, I have to add this.
Well, it's interesting you raised the element of about being a noir film, because I hadn't originally connected that dot or those dots, but now that I think about it, it really does have those elements. And even if somebody was to say, no, it's not noir, you have to almost say it's at least noir adjacent. It has those elements.
Adjacent, yes. Exactly.
Well, I think a lot of Kazan's stuff from that period, you know, I think it sort of lent into that style of filmmaking. I think a lot because of the location shooting that he used. You know, he had a really great sense of place and time in his movies, and you know, the great use of sort of light and shadow and depth of field. You know, there's a lot of sequences where characters are up above characters or below characters, and so he uses sort of this real sort of vertical depth in it, and that's all very sort of film noir influenced. You know, I think it's fair to say that who's it? Boris Kaufman did the cinematography. Who worked with like Jean Vigo and people like that. He was probably sort of the one generation removed from like the the architects of film noir, if you like, who came over in the 30s from Germany and what have you, and really sort of infused Hollywood movies in the 40s with that look. I think he kind of came up a little bit after that, and so was borrowing all of those, or not borrowing them, but just being influenced by all of those sort of great cinematographers of the film noir period, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Boris Kaufman definitely will. He shot one of the films that is very common in every single top 20 movie list of the best films ever. That is La Talente by Jean Vigo, that you mentioned, Jean Vigo. He was the DOP of this, the cinematographer of this movie. It's true that also you can feel the noir touch in the look and feel of some of the scenes. I remember the scene at the church with all these shadows. There is a lot of expressionism there. That is kind of Fritz Langish, if you admit this term. Also the up and downs that you mentioned and all this. And this is definitely something that has to do with noir or feels noir. Going back again to Eddie Muller and what he considers a noir film. There is some things that apply to On the Waterfront and other don't. You don't have a femme fatale in this case, but you definitely have the disenchantment, the disillusionment, this kind of feelings from the character. You have the anti-hero, and you have the edgy dialogues. There is other things that you don't have. So I absolutely agree that there is definitely adjacent to sorry, how do you pronounce it? Adjacent, as Steve said, to noir.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned the dialogue. I think the dialogue is very stylized in this movie. Like a film noir, it's not quite sort of the patter of the gangsters or the private detectives, but definitely some of the terminology, some of the turns of phrase that the longshoremen use, and like Lee J. Cobb uses. It's the language of the streets, the slang of the streets, which I think helps infuse it with a. It's kind of two things simultaneously that kind of juxtapose each other. There's an authenticity to it, but at the same time, there's a kind of heightened, stylized way of speaking with it. That it feels very much kind of this specific world, but no one really talks like that at the same time. And it's those two things in collision that I think work so well with the dialogue.
Just a quick anecdote. I posted on Facebook, was it last night or 2 nights ago? I watched On the Waterfront, and I put a post that I'm watching one of my favorite movies, and an old high school friend, just as an anecdote, said, "I love this movie, and by the way, the old couple I bought my house from, he was a longshoreman who was in that film as an extra, that they got all these local longshoremen to be part of the extras." And so she just made mention of that. I bought a house from one of those people that were the longshoremen in a lot of those scenes.
Oh, that's really funny. I just heard something earlier today from Spike Lee, obviously, big New York director, and he was saying that the plan originally was that they were going to shoot it in Red Hook in Brooklyn, down on the docks in Brooklyn, but that the mob came over to the production and said, "If you make this movie in Brooklyn, we're going to kill Kazan, we're going to kill Brando, we're going to kill you." And so they were like, "Okay, fine, we're moving it to Hoboken, we're moving it across to Jersey," and that's why it's set there as opposed to in Brooklyn, apparently.
But but it's true that originally it seems that the story, the New York Times series of articles, the story is based on, it happened in New Jersey, not in Brooklyn.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because it's about the killing of a dock hire, a guy who was hiring workers for the dock. And what I read about is that the story happens in New Jersey.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, maybe Spike Lee was telling tall tales. Who knows? But
no. But actually, that's what I read. Probably Spike has done homework better than me. But in any case, that's what I read. Is the killing of a New Jersey hiring manager or something?
Right. Yeah. And I was aware that it was based on articles by Malcolm Johnson, which won a Pulitzer Prize for local reporting or whatever. But I suppose the other big thing that we need to talk about with this movie is the acting, and that this was like the first real movie that promoted this new kind of method acting from the Actors Studio, which Kazan had set up, and was it the Strasbourg? Is it the Strasbourg method or
Yeah.
yeah, and obviously Brando, as well as people like some Montgomery Clift, who we saw in one of our previous episodes in
From Here to Eternity.
From Here to Eternity. Thank you. Yeah. He was really pioneering this new kind of performance, and people to this day signal out this performance in this movie by Brando as, a performance that kind of just changed the world, and it just changed how people approach acting, in a way that they hadn't, that they hadn't even considered for like decades before. And everything up until this point was far more theatrical. It was less interested in being realistic. It was super stylized. It was either a full body performance like Gene Kelly that we were just watching in An American in Paris recently, or Olivier in Hamlet that we were watching as well, or it was something sort of super stylized and very, very specific. Here, what Brando was doing was sort of a degree of depth and authenticity that we just had never been seen before. And I think in a way, it's unfair to put the spotlight just on Brando. I mean, he's the lead, and obviously he's the best at it, but the whole cast, everybody is doing just phenomenal work in a style that you hadn't really seen before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this is Brando at his peak, but you also have to mention Karl Malden, who just brilliantly plays this priest who initially is scared, like everybody's scared. And I love the way that Kazan conveys this brooding fear that people have. Like, even good people just want to shut up. I mean, Joey at the beginning, he's killed, and his dad just wants everybody to shut up. It's his own son, and so there's this wall of silence that goes out. And when Eva Marie Saint shames Karl Malden right at the beginning about what's right and wrong, and then he finally takes up the mantle and does the Christ thing, like, I may die, but there's going to be some good that comes out of it. It just creates this atmosphere that I think has made this movie one of the greats that it is.
Oh, 100%. And I like that James says that Brando's work in this movie changed the craft of acting forever. And I absolutely agree. And it's true that all the rest of the cast is incredible, and you just only have to watch the scene in the cab with Rod Steiger, the two brothers talking the famous "I could be a contender" line. That's obviously some of the best that you can watch ever.
I have to take them dives for the short end money.
Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am.
No, I was just going to say, what strikes me out of that cab scene, Mike, is for years I love to do my little Brando. I could have been a contender. I could have been a contender. But, watching it this time, what really struck me, and maybe it's because I'm getting older and families taking on different, it was the brother. He goes, "No, Charlie, it was you. It was you, Charlie." When he said that, you could see Rod Steiger. It was like just hitting him like a sledgehammer in the chest. It was just one of the most amazing scenes in cinema history.
And yeah, absolutely it is. And one important thing, also going back again to how Brando changed acting through his character in On the Waterfront. Let me add something about one of the reasons that I also choose On the Waterfront is because Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley started recording in 1954. That is the same year that the movie On the Waterfront was released. And Elvis, obviously, he wanted to be a big star and a bit of a singer and all that. But what he really wanted to be was Marlon Brando, especially after watching On the Waterfront. And that was released the same month that he came into Sun Studios and recorded his first singles. The most interesting thing about the connection between Elvis, Brando, and On the Waterfront is that Elvis was pushing it so much to be an actor when he started being famous that Elia Kazan, who was a big Elvis Presley fan, offered him to be the main character in East of Eden. So this is an interesting connection. Not only that, Leonard Bernstein also said once that, and he said that, I mean, I quote approximately, that Elvis Presley was the most important thing that ever happened to music. And he said this to a friend of his who was a publisher in those years of Time magazine. This was a conversation during the 60s when Elvis was already alive and playing in Vegas. And the guy from Time said, "Oh, come on, I mean, what about Pablo Picasso? He was much more important for art than Elvis Presley, the expression of art on Pablo." And he said, no. Elvis Presley put the rhythm on everything. So it's another connection of On the Waterfront and Elvis Presley that I couldn't help to explain here. But yeah, he was Elia Kazan was a big fan. Leonard Bernstein was a big fan. Sorry, guys, I had to say this.
No, that's a great anecdote, Mike. And you also raised the very fact that Leonard Bernstein did the music for On the Waterfront. I think we should.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's did I found though, because I knew Bernstein had done it, I was really paying extra attention this time to the music. And by and large, I felt it was beautiful. But there was times where I felt that there was a more subdued dialogue going on, and there was kind of a bombastic Bernstein, symphony going in the background. I remember thinking, and now I'm not a music guy, I'm not the one that could be critiquing music in any stretch, but I did feel a couple times like the music was a little overpowering for the scene. But that's just my humble opinion.
I was going to say the exact same thing, actually. Love Leonard Bernstein. His music's fantastic. Yeah, I think this is like one of the only scores he did that isn't based on one of his shows or something like that. But yeah, it's the one element, in my opinion, of the film that kind of breaks it out of this kind of gritty realism that everything else is going for. Is that you got these massive horns that kind of just sort of sex up the whole thing, make it all just a bit bigger and a bit larger than life and a bit showier than the rest of the material. The rest of the material seems to be going for something a little more grounded, a little more gritty, a little more sort of muscular, if you like. But then Leonard Bernstein just can't help himself, comes in with his horns, and it's all just like brah, 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 and it's all just a little bit much. I mean, it's great, but yeah, I felt the same way, that in a couple of moments it just feels it's just operating on a slightly different scale to the rest of the movie.
See, Mike, this is the problem with doing this with James for 3 years now, is we're syncing too much. I wanted to throw out something a little controversial so he or yourself would come back with a little like, you don't know what you're talking about, Steve. This was and he's agreeing with me. What are we doing here? Come on.
I know. we should just stop now that we're not fighting anymore. We should just stop, maybe. But
well, there is two things, obviously, that we should definitely elaborate about, and it's Elia Kazan's circumstances when he made the movie and all the political controversy about it. This is obvious, but there is another thing that I would like to talk about that is completely different than this and much more light in an entertaining. That is the how On the Waterfront inspired other gangster movies or series like The Sopranos, for example. And there is some itty bits on The Waterfront that, watching it again recently, I realized that, for example, The Sopranos have a couple of ideas which are very interesting, and then they take them directly from On the Waterfront.
Oh, and, have you got some examples?
Yeah, there is something that I thought that has to do with the realism of the movie. Realism that, by the way, Martin Scorsese always praised. That I remember watching a video with Martin Scorsese saying, talking again about the bar scene and at the beginning, and he says, this could have been shot like 1 block from my house. This could, or the house of his youth. And it's so realistic. So there is something very realistic about the movie. It's the first time that you see Rod Steiger, I think it's the first time they talk, Rod Steiger and Marlon Brando's brothers. Marlon Brando is basically doing nothing. He's supposed to be working at the dock, and he's just reading some kind of a semi-nudie magazine and just laying there completely, basically doing nothing. And then Rod Steiger arrives and they start talking and all this. And everybody, the rest of the cast, is a figuration. The rest of the cast is just working around them pretty hard. And this is something that The Soprano uses in several seasons, and is this idea of the mafia getting their members a salary from construction sites or the dogs or whatever, but basically they are doing nothing. They just sit on a circle, bullshitting for hours and getting paid at the end of the day. And this is something that you can see reflected also on the Waterfront. And I think the idea comes definitely from On the Waterfront, and they use it in The Sopranos.
You know, what's interesting, Mike, is I was one of these people who missed the Sopranos, mainly because I started to watch it in the early days when it was on Netflix, when we used to get the DVDs and everybody was talking about it, the early 2000s. But my now 26-year-old son walked in at one of the strip bar scenes when he was like about 6 years old and said, "She's got bumps." And I thought, okay, I can't watch this. I can't watch this. And it went to the side. The funny thing is, fast forward to today, my son has recently watched the first 2 or 3 seasons. He says, "Pops, you got to catch up with me so we can watch it together." So I just finished, I think, season 1. And little side tangent, but I'm on the Sopranos train now.
Oh, excellent.
Well, the idea of the mobsters getting paid for doing nothing and just bullshitting around and just staying there is more in seasons. I think it starts showing up in seasons 5 and 6, I think. But in any case, it's definitely something that the moment that I saw again this scene between with Rod Steiger and Marlon Brando, and everybody's working except them both. It's definitely something that inspired this specific idea in The Sopranos.
Yeah. In fact, one of the threats of Lee J. Cobb is when you're in his good favor, you really have the job where you can sit around and do nothing, the cushy job. And when he wants to smack Marlon Brando down a little bit, no, you're going to have to do some of the dirty work now until you get back into favor. So there's that pyramid or that ladder of favor of where you actually have to work versus whether you just sit around and bullshit and get paid.
But it can turn on a dime, of course, because Charlie, his brother, is the number 2 guy. But then when he sort of lets Terry off, he lets Marlon Brando off, he's killed the same evening, kind of thing. But you can see the huge. You can see the
violent scene, by the way.
Right.
Sorry.
But you can see the influence on Martin Scorsese's stuff so strongly. I coincidentally just rewatched Mean Streets just like last week, and De Niro's performance as Tommy Boy in that, you can see all of the DNA of Marlon Brando's performance. It's a very different character. You know, he's the live wire that sort of can't help but get himself in trouble all of the time. But you can see that it's coming from the same space. It's using the same artistic muscles, if you like, in order to give that performance, but also just the world. I mean, Scorsese obviously drew everything from his neighborhood and from his real life, and like you say, you know, he talks about On the Waterfront and says that looks like what it was just around the corner. And you see all of that same thing, particularly Mean Streets and particularly Goodfellas. It's the less glamorous end of mob life. You know, this isn't The Godfather, where they're essentially like a royal family, and it might as well be The Crown or something rather than, a gangster movie. And he does that in Casino, but in Mean Streets, in Goodfellas, I guess you get a little bit of it in The Irishman as well later on. It's that day-to-day grifting of being, you know, a sort of a mob guy who does get his hands dirty. He has to be there, walking the neighborhoods, walking the streets, you know, squeezing your weekly salary out of the rest of the community. Like you said, it's all right there On the Waterfront. So let's talk about Elia Kazan, because I think it's an incredibly, I mean, obviously his whole story is incredibly problematic. And it's almost in a very, very different way. It's almost like with Roman Polanski. It's like you look at him and you're like, yeah, his films are absolutely amazing, but and there's this but. And I think with Elia Kazan, you know, he's got these fantastic movies that he's made. You know, Panic in the Streets. Obviously, he's won the Oscar already for Gentleman's Agreement that we were talking about. East of Eden, you know, and On the Waterfront is arguably, you know, the pinnacle of everything. But there's this little asterisk next to his name.
What we can start from a positive point of view, and it's that being the Elvis fan that he was, And as I said, he offered East of Eden to Elvis, but I had to finish the story because I forgot to mention the reason why Elvis didn't get the role, and finally it was given to James Dean, and because he was going to play the James Dean character, or the character, or at least the role that finally came up, or finally ended up playing James Dean. The reason was, and you are very, now that you probably recently have seen Elvis the movie and Tom Hanks playing Colonel Tom Parker, the reason that it would be quite funny to know that the reason that Elvis finally didn't get or didn't accept the role was because Colonel Tom Parker didn't accept it, because he was looking for movies that had marketable soundtracks. So because what he wanted was songs that could be hits. So, but at the end of the day, Elvis finally was a movie star, probably not in the way that he thought he was going to be, but he was. And this is unfortunately due to Colonel Tom Parker's deeds. But this is the reason that he wasn't finally accepting Elia Kazan's offer to be one of the two main actors in East of Eden. Controversy now. Steve, James.
Where do we begin with his his decision to speak before the House of Anti-American Activities Committee? That's where it all begins and ends, really, isn't it?
Okay, reading a little bit, I think probably, obviously, I'm not a historian or not an expert in Elia Kazan's biography, but the impression I have reading different sources is that when he finally was this kind of Hollywood supergrass, or he became this kind of Hollywood supergrass, he was not a communist anymore. I mean, he was a member of the Communist Party during the 1930s, but he was completely, he put a lot of distance between the Communist Party and his career when he made the transition from theater to the movies. So I am not sure that I think definitely probably he was an anti-communist when he became this supergrass again for the House of American Activities. So that's because normally the perception we have is that he was a member of the Communist Party that immediately told on his comrades, and he became this kind of a traitor. I don't think the process was exactly as the perception that we have, or most people has. I think he was already someone who put a lot of distance, or was distanced from the Communist Party when he was called to this court hearing by the HUAC.
And I think it's fair to say that, the entire McCarthy witch hunt trials were ridiculous, and what, it was all blown out of proportion. Their very motives were blown out of proportion. This idea that the country was being overrun by communists, by dangerous communists who were going to upend democracy and all the rest of it, was ridiculous, patently ridiculous and overblown. So you've got to get all of that out of the one hand. So it was a completely absurd situation anyway. And then, but then you've got to deal with the fact that he did go ahead and he did do it. And then he makes this film as his kind of, not as an apology, but more as a defiant, see, look, I did the right thing all along. And for a lot of people, it does tarnish the reputation or the shine of this movie to some degree. But it didn't. I mean, I know we're going to get. So I was just going to say we're going to get to it in a minute. So I don't mean to jump the gun, but he's still. I am vaguely familiar with the story. I kind of know it, but I can't really add a whole lot. But he did win Best Director for On the Waterfront. So obviously there was no huge pushback in the community to punish him if that was the case.
Not only the Oscar, he won the Directors Guild of America award as Best Director. So this obviously, probably the impact in the community was not as big as we think. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I would like to talk about is James mentioned that the movie finally is like a justification or like a statement saying I did the right thing. But honestly, I think he was a little bit, if I can say this, he was a little bit dishonest in his analogy between the figure of Marlon Brando against the mobs and his figure against the Communist Party. I think
Of
the
course.
analogy doesn't really work. It's a little bit dishonest because
Yeah.
the Communist Party of America was a non-violent legal organization. And the other guys are basically criminal, horrible monsters. So I don't think the analogy that he was trying to do or to make was very honest. In any case, he did a masterpiece of a movie, and we're all grateful about it. But if we get into the justification of the whole thing, it doesn't work for me as an analogy.
No, I totally agree, and I think that that's what people sort of push back against. They're like, don't be absurd for exactly that reason. You know, what Terry Molloy does in On the Waterfront, everybody can get behind. You know, he did the right thing unquestionably.
Unquestionably,
right?
Yeah.
For the good of the entire community. And for Kazan to say that what he did is comparable to that is patently ridiculous. And puts himself on a pedestal. He's like, look how brave I am. Look at this great sacrifice I made. It was like, well, no, you could have just kept your mouth shut like everybody else did, you know, and all you did was get some of your mates blacklisted.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Arthur Miller or Orson Welles were very vocal and very
they were
belligerent against him about it. It's true that other people, obviously, like Charlton Heston and other guys, defended him, I'm very cautious about judging people in situations that I haven't lived, and you never know, and you always think you would be the hero. But I absolutely agree that both situations, the one in the fiction and the one in reality, are not comparable.
I mean, I remember. I think the first time when it really kind of came home to me, I'd heard about it, but the first time where it really sort of landed for me was at the Oscars in 1999, I think it was, when they gave him like an honorary award.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I remember, you know, and I knew who he was. I knew, oh yeah, he's the director of On the Waterfront, blah, blah, blah. You know, he's very well regarded, you know, and he died a couple of years later. So, you know, I remember him very frail, you know, coming onto the stage to receive it. But then I remember half the audience not standing up, not clapping. Mm-hmm. I remember Ed Harris in particular, not to just pull one name out, signal him out, but that's who I do remember. And I think he was nominated that year for Pollock, I think it was. So he was pretty much on the front row or somewhere, and he's just sitting there like this. And I was like, well, what happened? You know, what? Yeah, he obviously didn't wrong Ed Harris back in the 1950s. So that is what I think motivated me to really kind of look into it more and try and get my head around the weight of what he had done and the importance of what he had done and the severity of naming names at that time. Seeing Ed Harris giving him a stink eye, I was like, okay.
Yeah. On the contrary, Ed Harris, and I invited him to my festival. He was a sweetheart, but he can have a quite kind of a scary stare sometimes. I agree with that. He can be a scary guy also. Maximum respect. Great actor, of course.
One of my favorite actors.
Just on the oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So going back to this Oscar ceremony when Elia Kazan received the honorary Oscar, just on the opposite side of the political spectrum from Ed Harris was Charlton Heston, and he was actually not exactly like defending him, but he was much more talking about him from an understanding position, saying that those were very complicated years. We should understand we were in a position, some people got in a position that was complicated not to collaborate with the HUAC. But we also have to understand that Charlton Heston has been all his life a hardcore anti-communist. So his opinion is a little bit biased here also.
Yeah.
So you just have to read his biography, and he's definitely someone who is we would consider not a hardcore conservative in some areas of life, but definitely he was a hardcore anti-communist and an anti-racist also, by the way.
Elia Kazan. Well, I'm sure there was so much pressure on him. As an immigrant himself, you know, I'm sure they probably threatened him with being expelled from the country. You know, I'm sure it was a very terrifying time. And if you were pulled up in front of the committee, you know, it was pretty scary and pretty terrible. And if you did know anything, I kind of understand. I kind of get it. That you'd be like, oh yeah, sure. And I know that a lot of people at different. So I was reading like the biography of Oppenheimer, And they're, everybody's naming everybody as a communist before the war, after the war, because they're so paranoid about leaking secrets. And you're right. I think you mentioned it earlier. It meant two very different things: being a communist before the war and being a communist after the war. It was quite trendy to be a communist before the war. And it was quite a groovy thing to do, particularly with the war in Spain. Right? Of course, a lot of people were sending money to the rebels fighting Franco in Spain, as I'm sure you know far more about it than I do.
It was definitely a romanticized version, all these optics of communism in the United States, the Lincoln Brigade in Spain, as you said, etc., etc. So it's very much different. But there is something that we cannot avoid speaking about when you're talking about Elia Kazan. You have to talk about Dalton Trumbo, because he was supposed to do exactly the right thing. He did exactly what Elia Kazan didn't. And it's true that Dalton Trumbo was already a member of the Communist Party after the war. So this is the only big difference. But he didn't tell names. He actually was blacklisted or canceled, as we would say now. But he finally found his way in Hollywood. But he's the guy who actually did exactly what people is blaming Elia Kazan of not doing.
Yeah, we were just talking about him in an earlier episode, weren't we? Because was it Roman Holiday that he co-wrote and got his name taken off? And then Spartacus was one later on, wasn't it? That he kind of wrote under a pseudonym. Was it Spartacus? I think?
Yeah.
Spartacus, I'm only remembering from the movie.
It saved his career. You've seen the movie also. And Kirk Douglas saved Dalton Trumbo's career writing Spartacus. Yeah.
But it is fascinating that so soon after him doing that, he sweeps the Oscars, essentially. It's like what, 2 years later, and you would think almost that he would have been a pariah in Hollywood at that time, but that seems to have only developed later, that sort of negative reputation.
Ed Harris was just being born, so he wasn't in the position to,
Well, exactly, and and I don't object to Ed Harris having that opinion. That's totally fine, but in that moment, I'm always one who's like gets swept up with the idea of ceremony, and there's a time and a place for certain things. And, I guess the most outrageous example of that in recent years is Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. And it's like, fine, he makes a joke about your wife, you can slap a person, but not at the Oscars, not in front of everybody. You're supposed to behave a certain way. And, that's just the way I was brought up. It's just like, you got to have a sense of occasion, kind of thing, and respect the fact. And I don't know, when you see big, powerful people not do that, when you see someone like Ed Harris not standing up and clapping some old man who's being given a nice shiny object, you're like, hang on a minute, something's up. But to each their own, I suppose.
To each their own. Sometimes I wonder if people just take on a little too much offense, or they take on other people's offense, and it becomes a badge to be worn. I'm not judging. I don't know, but
today, sure. In this day and age, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Everybody loves to take on somebody else's offense, or just be so easily offended by literally anything. And not only that, I think that's not the important thing. It's not the fact that I get offended by everything. It's that you have to care that I get offended by everything and adjust accordingly. It's like, fuck off.
Yeah,
but that's where we are. We digress. We digress. All right, so I
was going to say we've opened up the Oscar question. Let's move on to that.
Let's have a look at the 27th Academy Award, where On the Waterfront got 12 nominations. So, which was not the most. All About Eve was the most, where it got 14, I think, but it won a record 8. It tied the record with Gone with the Wind and From Here to Eternity just the year before, actually, by winning 8 awards on the night. Most notably, of course, Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor. We like to point out instances where there might have been an opportunity, were it done these days, for category fraud. Because, films these days are always being accused of category fraud for splitting their actors up into different categories so that they can all win. And this year, sadly, On the Waterfront was a huge victim of that, because all 3 of those great supporting actors, Lee Jacob. Yeah, I'm saying that right. Yeah, so Lee Jacob, Karl Malden, and Rod Steiger were all nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and they split the vote between them, and none of them won. And had it been, I don't think you could have put any of them in lead actor, but unfortunately, it seems that the love would have been just spread around between the three of them. They're all fantastic in it. So
Oh yes.
the chances of any one of them actually winning were probably pretty slim right from the outset, just because.
Did Eva
How do you
Marie
choose?
Saint win? I think she won, didn't
She
she?
did, and it
She
was
did,
basically
Yeah, she did.
essentially her
She did, and
debut film.
it was her first role in a big screen and or in any screen, and she won the Oscar. And there is another interesting thing about her, and is that she's from New Jersey. Well, she's alive. She's 100 years old now, and she's from New Jersey. So maybe this is one of the reasons as Elia Kazan was so much realism prone when he was conceiving this movie, that maybe one of the reasons, besides being a good actress, was that she was originally from the area where the movie set. So and she won the Oscar. So great casting, great casting idea from Elia Kazan. Yeah.
Is it just me, or does she look a lot like Jessica Chastain in this movie, or does Jessica Chastain look a lot like her?
Yeah,
all the way through, I was kind of like, wow,
yeah, structure, yeah. I agree.
Yeah, no, yes,
I didn't think about it, but now I agree. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, good. Yeah, there was definitely something in there. I mean, there were some other. It's what is interesting is that Marlon Brando, bizarrely now, was not considered the favorite to win. He had been nominated 4 years in a row for Best Actor, which has never been done again. So, Streetcar Named Desire, what was it? Viva Zapata, but also Elia Kazan, and I forget what the other one was. But 4 years in a row, he was Julius Caesar was the other one. 4 years in a row, he's nominated, but bizarrely, even after that kind of build-up, that kind of record, and he's going against Humphrey Bogart again, who beat him when he was up for Streetcar Named Desire, and everyone was like, "Well, that's weird." He should have totally won for that. He was not considered the favorite. Bing Crosby for The Country Girl was considered the favorite that year. I think probably because he was already a bit old, and people were like, okay, let's give Bing Crosby an Oscar. But yeah, bizarrely, he was up against Humphrey Bogart again. Bing Crosby was the favorite. Marlon Brando, therefore, was seen as something of an upset when he won for what is now considered one of the greatest performances of all time. Similarly, Grace Kelly did win for The Country Girl, and that was considered a big surprise. Judy Garland was the favorite for A Star Is Born that year. To the point where Judy Garland didn't attend because she'd just had a baby. And so they had sent a TV crew who had set up in her front room to record her acceptance speech with her if she won, and then she didn't win. And so they just had to sort of rather awkwardly just kind of pack up and leave her house, which... I can't imagine them doing. I mean, obviously now we have satellite feeds and a laptop is all you need and all the rest of it. But I can't imagine anything of that scale ever happening again. It kind of, if it reminds me of anything, it reminds me of how they did the Oscars that year during COVID, when everybody assumed Chadwick Boseman was going to win posthumously for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, to the extent that they reordered the awards so that Best Actor went last instead of Best Picture. And everyone's like, what? This is weird. And they had planned this whole big thing, this whole big memorial for Chadwick Boseman. And then Anthony Hopkins won, who wasn't even there. And they were just like, oh, that's it. Okay, good night, everybody. It was very odd. And I thought they would have learned their lessons from this year, maybe. But no. Did it win cinematography? It did win black and white. Back in the days when they used to still split the cinematography, a color one and a black and white one. So it did win black and white.
I also. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Mike. Please.
No, I just was saying that regarding the cinematography, I read, and I didn't know this. I read this when I was researching a little bit before our talk. Is that originally the producer Sam Spiegel? I mean, he pushed to make the film in color. That is something and it was Elia Kazan's insisting that no, it should be black and white, and finally, obviously, it was black and white. But there was the idea. The original idea was considering shooting it in color. Yeah.
That would have been absolute madness. I think. I mean,
travesty.
One of Kazan's great strengths is that he has this kind of documentary realism to his films, shooting on location as much as possible, and the ironically, it's the black and white footage, although that's not how we see the world. grounds it in a reality and in a documentary sort of authenticity that color doesn't. And it's always been one of those weird contradictions that it kind of feels more real if it's in black and white, which is kind of odd, but it's totally true and it totally works that way. So no, thank God he won that fight. He did obviously shoot in color. East of Eden's in color, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, of course.
East of Eden's in color, but he did
glossy cinematography.
I just had a brain freeze for a moment there because he did continue to shoot in black and white after that, like Facing the Crowd. I think it's black and white, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And things like that. But
did you mention the other movies did I miss what we were going up against this year
for best picture?
Best picture.
Okay, no, it's interesting. It was the Cane Mutiny, the Country Girl, which I haven't seen, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, so you got and Three Coins in the Fountain. So two big studio musicals. So, the 50s and the 60s are a big sort of musical period as well. I mean, I've noticed this in recent years, that there's always a big movie that is considered to this day to be arguably like the best remembered or the best loved that doesn't even get like a Best Picture nomination. Rear Window was out this year, and Hitchcock got a nomination for Best Director, and it picked up a couple of other nominations. I don't think it actually ended up winning anything. And it's just amazing to consider now in hindsight that one of Hitchcock's greatest movies. I mean, we know he was notoriously unlucky at the Oscars, but but that it didn't even get a Best Picture nomination, whereas Two Coins in the Fountain did.
I was going to say, other than Cane Mutiny and, of course, On the Waterfront, those other three barely register a memory as opposed to Rear Window.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was a pretty weak year. But then, I mean, On the Waterfront just basically swept. It won 8, and the other winners that only won 2 were The Country Girl and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And Three Coins in the Fountain won 2 Oscars, probably for its music.
I would have put 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ahead of a couple of those, because at the end of the day, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, James Mason and it's Kirk Douglas in that as well, isn't it? Is it? Yeah, Kirk Douglas is the main seafarer, like the strong guy. Pretty sure it's Kirk Douglas and James Mason.
Yeah,
James
you're right.
Mason playing Captain Nemo. That was I wouldn't necessarily say it like beats On the Waterfront but I could have easily seen that as one of the nominated Best Pictures of the year. It's one of the stronger Disney films from those years with a little gravitas to it.
It won
and great special effects for the time period.
Well, that's what it won. It won Best Visual Effects and then Best Art Direction Color.
Yeah. The sea monster scene, I mean, the giant squid scene. I mean, by today it's a little ho hum, but for 1954, that was just it was terrifying and gripping.
But it's fascinating, even at a time when they were nominating sort of musicals and stuff, that A Star Is Born was not one of the musicals that was nominated for Best Picture either. Yeah. It was Seven Brides for Seven Brothers and Three Coins in the Fountain, and you're like, okay. I mean, I always think it's fascinating looking back. Well, it's still about 70 years ago now, and seeing which films have endured, which films survive, and which films have been completely forgotten about. And sometimes, as we have noticed in recent years, it's the Best Picture winners that get immediately forgotten about. But I don't think there's any danger of On the Waterfront being forgotten about or overlooked anytime soon.
Which leads us now, Mike, to the question we always ask at the end of every Best Picture. And this is a foregone conclusion, I think. But the question we ask is, does On the Waterfront deserve its place in Oscar history? And does it stand the test of time? We hand it over to you.
Oh, 100%. I mean, definitely it deserves all the reputation that it has, and it deserves its place in the Olympus of the best movies ever. Oh, by the way, Marlon also knows that it's the end of our podcast because
that was great timing.
So,
yeah, great timing.
Yeah, great timing, Marlon. Thank you. So the thing is that it's not only a very important movie. I always think that when Quentin Tarantino always says that the 50s were the weakest decade on the history of film, and he has a point there. But I think he always forgets about On the Waterfront when he says this, because probably he's right. I mean, there were again, as some other people said, like Martin Scorsese himself said always that the 50s were more recreational, more focused on entertaining the audiences and all that, and compared with the innovative 60s and 70s, they can look a little bit like, I don't know, childish. I don't know. I cannot find really the words, but so maybe Quentin has a point there. But I think that if you immediately would remind him, hey, what about the older Waterfront? He would probably back off a little bit. So it's a very, very important movie, I think, in the history of film.
You know, I almost want to, I feel with our guests, I almost want to leave it with that. I have nothing to add. I mean, I mirror everything Mike said. I think we've just spent the last hour shining the accolades on this film, of which it so richly deserves. I'm going to turn it over to you, James.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great idea to me. I think Mike summed it up way better than either of us could. I don't have anything to add. He didn't say anything I disagree with or anything like that. You know, this is really just, you know, one of these Mount Olympus movies, as you called it. You know, it's gonna stand at the top of the tree of Best Picture winners for all time. I think far and away the best film of the 1950s so far, for sure. You know, we don't want to look too much into the future before we get there.
We haven't got to Gigi yet. We haven't got to
Gigi yet. That's for sure. But yeah, no, absolute masterpiece in every area as well. You know, it's just one of those almost kind of perfect movies, and it stands as, you know, a testament to the craft and as a sort of microcosm of a very specific moment in time as well, both in front of and behind the camera.
I would like to add one thing about.
No, we're out of time. Sorry, no, you can't.
Time. Okay.
Okay.
About what Steve says about the test of time. Not only the dilemmas that show up in the movie are obviously timeless, like the dilemma of delation and doing the right thing in the most complicated situations. But there is one specific scene, one specific moment in the movie that I love, and it's actually also timeless. And it's the moment that Yves Saint-Marie and Marlon Brando go to a bar, and he's trying to seduce her using alcohol and beer. And but as the dialogue evolves, you see that it's actually her who is not seducing him, but trying to get him to confess, also using alcohol. And he's the weak guy there, and he's the guy who's so nervous, and because he's hiding this hideous secret, and it's the alcohol who finally gets him almost confessing. So it's not a seduction scene, it's a confession scene, and it's a moment of female empowerment that definitely not very common during the 1950s. So this is a scene that just stays with me all the time when I think about it.
Yeah, well, that's James and I, as well as Mike's opinion on the Waterfront. Mike, it's been so wonderful having you part of our analysis of every Best Picture and our 1954 Oscar winner. We've had some wonderful things to say about On the Waterfront, but usually, James, we say, if you have a differing opinion, then please put it in the comments. But if you have a differing opinion, like you don't like On the Waterfront, we'd really like to know why, because this is, I think, as the three of us agree, one of the greatest movies ever made.
Absolutely.
James?
I mean, I think there are going to be some people who can't look past Kazan's personal life and what he did, and because it is sort of mirrored in here, and he encourages the fact that it's mirrored in here. You know, let's hear from you. You know, yeah, if for some reason you don't like this, if you don't like it, the method, if you don't like this style of acting, you know, if it's too self-absorbed and too narcissistic, you know, by all means, you know, let us know in the comments. We would love to hear from you. So, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and speak about a film that obviously means a great deal to you. We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you back in the future to talk about another Best Picture winner in the decades to come. But for now, we really appreciate your time. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much,
My
Mike.
honor and my pleasure. Thank you so much, Steve and James.
All right,
everybody.
Until next episode.
Bye.
Goodbye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.